Welcome. I'm going to talk about ideas for making your ideas stick together in your writing, and I'm going to pull from ideas from Dana Ferris's book, Language Power, specifically Tutorial 5. So if you're already using that book, you can refer to it later on. But we're specifically going to work with a different article. So what we're going to do today is look at 3 strategies for helping your writing stick together, and we're going to look at an article to see how that writer does it in that piece of writing, and we're going to look at the language choices that the writer uses and the impact that has on the article. So as we start off with that, let's turn to the article. This is a short write-up of an interview with John Marbo, and it was published with NPR's StoryCorps. And they publish, I would consider them profiles. They're short articles about individual people, and usually they try to focus on something unique about that person. So I'm not going to tell you what it's about because I want you to look at it. If you're doing this to follow along with me. So I'm going to give you a minute to look at this. This is the first half of the article, and from the introduction you can think about what would this be about. And as you're thinking about that, I'm going to play the audio of it, and the audio includes a few extra details, but more or less it follows along the write-up of exactly what you see there, with a few exceptions.
It is time now for StoryCorps, and today we'll meet a man who performs 2 very essential, very different jobs. John Marbo is a Lutheran pastor who grew up admiring his local garbage collectors in Alexandria, Minnesota. And when times were lean for his family, he decided to take on some shifts hauling trash. He came to StoryCorps with his 13-year-old daughter, Charlie, to talk about his work as a pastor and garbage man.
I've been hauling trash probably since you were about 8 years old. And I brought the truck to your school, didn't I?
Yeah, you decided to pick me up in the garbage truck. Then I hopped in reluctantly. I was kind of like, this is my last
Right
day
in front of your friends.
Right in front of my friends.
Uh-huh. Did I ever tell you the story about when I pulled up to an intersection and there was a mother and her little children? And her littlest boy just started waving and I was waving. And the mother looked up at me with this kind of concerned look and then grabbed her son. It was almost as though, no, that's not something you're going to want to be.
I think, to me, as your kid, I'm not embarrassed when people say, like, oh, what did your dad do? And I'm like, oh, he's a pastor. He's a garbage man.
Okay, and the next part is something that the writer put in here, and it's not directly from the interview, even though the rest of it goes on from the interview. So take a minute and just write down what you think from this introduction that this article is going to be about, because looking at the language is almost always connected to what type of article is being written and what it's about. So I'll pause it, and you can pause it to take a minute and actually write it down. That's what I suggest. And when you're ready to go, we'll move on to the first step. So the first step that I would suggest is, as you're looking at just this section right here, is to identify what you think are the most important or common words or ideas. There's a difference between most important and most common, which I'll address in just a minute, but to start out, what do you think they are? You can download the link that includes this excerpt, this portion of the article, or you can just write out a list. What are those words? Take a minute. And when you're ready to go, this is where we will pick this up. So if you were looking at the most frequent, then what you might notice is some of the most common are the very general words and the connector type of words. And then there's also some very common content type of words. I used the Lex Tutor frequency calculator, and you can look at this as well, but it mixes all those together. So what I recommend, since it's not clear exactly what's important from the frequency, even though that's a good start, is to look at the keywords. And the first type of keywords are the words that are repeated. And again, you could look these up, the Lex Word Keyword Calculator. But the two that I'm going to suggest first that actually were pulled up on there are Lutheran and pastor. So I'm going to come back to here and mark everywhere that Lutheran and pastor is. What color should I start with? I'll start with this. So Lutheran and pastor, pastor, and Lutheran and pastor. And at least in my reading of it, I didn't see anything that replaced either one of those. And one of the reasons I think that is because within this type of article, there's not any good synonyms of it. So you just have to repeat those words. But notice there's not too many times that they're repeated. So the next thing are synonyms. And these were, again, words that were pulled out as keywords, meaning that they were important for the article. Trash and garbage, which are synonyms for each other, really have the same meaning. And haul and collect, which are not exactly the same meaning, but they're both used with trash and garbage. Haul is used with both trash and garbage. Collect is used with trash and garbage. So let's go to the article and look at that. Starting even from the title, I'm going to use a different color here. What about orange? Garbage and trash. Garbage and trash. Trash. Notice there's none in this paragraph. These are both stories. And trash. And then haul and collect. Let me use a different color. Maybe I'll use purple. Collectors is a form of it, hauling. Notice it's all right together with garbage and collectors, hauling and trash. Haul and trash. Nothing is here. And collectors. So if we're looking at the reason for those synonyms, you can see that it's highlighting one of the key things that's happening in this story. If you remember from the way that StoryCorps introduced it, is it's telling us about John Marbo and how he had this kind of dual identity as a pastor and a garbage collector, these two jobs that he was doing. And so it's introducing both of those right here in the introduction. And even throughout into this paragraph right here, it's contrasting those two positions, those two jobs that he has. And then what's happening right here? You can pause it a little bit longer if you want to, but what you could look at is saying, well, okay, this one, both of them is contrasted, but what about right here? What's the connection, since we're looking at how things are connected together, what's happening right here? If I were to explain what I think is happening, or at least one thing, usually there's several things happening, I see some of the feelings are being connected. So it's talking about how the mother is saying that she doesn't, it's a little bit of a feeling of embarrassed. It's not something you want to be. She looks concerned. And then the daughter is saying, well, I'm not embarrassed. So it's contrasting those two feelings. But there's no words that are connecting it. It's the idea that's connected. So we can look at another way that in the words, those ideas are connected. And that takes us to our next point. The next one is with pronouns and determiners. So he, his, her, and I. So I'm going to use the highlighter, for this one and look at every pronoun or determiner that refers to John Marbo, because you don't want to keep referring in an article to his name, John, 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 or Marbo, Marbo. So his, and I'll highlight it. His. So far there's no other person in between here, so we can keep referring to he and his, because it's only him. We start a new paragraph, so we started with Marbo again, and then we say his. And now we have his daughter's name, but we know it's a she, so it's okay to use he. Because the daughter is a she, I'm actually going, I'll come back and I'll use a different color for that one. So we're still looking for pronouns, determiners that are referring to Marbo. So we have to figure out who is saying this one, and we might remember this from listening to it, but it's he says. So he was talking, and that means the I is him. Did I ever tell you? I think that's a generic. Oh no, he was talking to the daughter right there. When I pulled up, there was a mother and daughter and her cutest little boy, sort of in I was waving. Mother looked up at me. So this is all referring to John Marbo. Grabbed her son. I was like, no, that's not something you're going to want to be. So since we started with a quote, I have to figure out who's saying this. This is the daughter. So if I look in here and see, okay, is there anywhere that she's talking about the father? I'm not embarrassed when people say, like, okay, what is your dad? It's not a pronoun. I'm like, oh, he. So that's the dad. He's a pastor. He's a garbage man. He's also an adjunct teaching youth. And he received his PhD. He took a collector's job because he was unemployed, needed to support his family. So really just once in each paragraph it's saying his name, and then the rest of the time is referring to him. So let's look at the daughter. The daughter is first mentioned here as Charlie. She, you is Charlie. The mother, look, that's not something you want to be. So Charlie's talking here and saying to me, it could be I think, but I think that's just a expression as opposed to referring to him as your kid. Oh, actually that's the dad again, so I need to change the color. But that's, I'm not on purpose, say what does your dad do? And I'm like, oh, he's a pastor. So we'll change this back one more time for your dad. So if I were to look at this as connections, the connections of referring to the father and the daughter are actually connected throughout both these stories. So both the feelings of embarrassed as well as the reference of what he is telling his daughter and then what his daughter is answering back. So that's one way that the coherence is happening through those two stories. So that's where we will end this. What could you do next? If you are in the working with language power, I'll actually put the page on there. That's page 81. You could look at any kind of article. This was I'll refer back to it. This was a narrative type article based off an interview. I often refer to it in my classes as a profile. But you could look at a more academic article to see how these same strategies are used, or really any other type of article. So that's what this practice is suggesting you do. Just look at it, few paragraphs, and see how repeated words and synonyms are used. And the other is that you could copy the whole article in to LexTutor and see if the same words that you thought were key are the same ones that the article thought was key. And because I like to end off with citations, I used a few images, so I will put this here. And if you want to stick around to see how to use the LexTutor keywords, then stick around. Otherwise, we're done. Okay, and this should take just a minute if you want to see how to do the LexTutor keyword. I'll pull this up. This is the same website that I referred to on the slide. Now to get the text, I'll show it here. I just copied it right directly from the website because it was a news article into Notepad, and this made it into, it took out all the images, which I didn't point out too much before. The images are interesting to look at in terms of providing coherence too. We just weren't looking at it. Anyway, I did Control-A, Control-C for my PC to do a copy. This has all the instructions and text set up, but simply all you have to do is copy it or highlight it all. Oops, I did the wrong thing. So I need to copy all of this and then paste it all into here. So this is, you can see the article. And then all you do is submit. So even though the steps to get here are pretty simple, the reason that I show you this is because this seems like a lot of information, and most of it is actually not necessary to look at closely. Mostly it's telling you that the text, the article is compared to a reference corpus or a reference collection of text that has 14 million words, both written and spoken, US and UK. And in that collection, the word Lutheran had only 4 occurrences, where in this one, our text was only 473 words, and it occurred 3 times. So that's what helps it lead to the conclusion that Lutheran is a key word or an important word. So what's important is actually this section right here, and it's saying the top key words were Lutheran, pastor, haul, trash, garbage, collect, and important. And that's what I think is most helpful to look at here. And that's where we'll stop.